Everyone going to give Jared a round of applause. Is the clicker up there for you?
I believe so.
All right, great.
Awesome. So thank you. Yeah, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, measurement. We did some of this yesterday. It was a lot of fun. So a little bit on us real quick for context. So Ocean Media is an independent media buying agency, and we work with a lot of e-commerce brands. So we are, our DNA from an agency perspective is to be very focused on the numbers, very focused on the data, and likewise for our brands. So, measurement and data and these kind of topics are extremely important to not just us, but the brands that we work with. So I think, to set this up, I think the challenge that a lot of us in this room are facing, or certainly I face on a day-to-day basis, is, how do we balance the scales between, us as marketers getting all the little sort of details and insights that we want in order to be able to optimize and grow and scale campaigns versus the objectives of the business, which is always to sell more widgets, sell more cars, sell more pills apparently, sell more, I think, butter from yesterday. And that can be increasingly more difficult as the video landscape, we continue to diversify our investments. So rewind 10 years, most of us are buying linear TV. Maybe we're doing a little bit of digital video. Relatively straightforward to sort of dial in and figure out what that mix looks like and what you should be doing. Fast forward to today, we're all running campaigns that have half a dozen different sort of video channels. And so we're doing things like CTV, and there's probably programmatic CTV, and we're certainly doing linear television, and we're doing Facebook, and we're doing TikTok, and we got YouTube in there, and there's all these pieces that we have to make sense of. But the business just wants to run the business wants to sell widgets, and the business doesn't necessarily want to make compromises in how you're executing media in order to learn stuff, to optimize and sell more widgets. And so, what we run into in this sort of, proliferation of, all these diverse channels and all these sort of walled gardens is a lot of testing in silos. So you'll do a geo-lift test, you'll do a conversion lift test, you'll do all these things, and those tests are very valuable, and they can be very effective, and they can give you very good learnings, but they're also very, disruptive and challenging to execute when, again, the goal is to sell widgets. So I'm gonna make a pitch for media mix models. You guys will let me know if this fit lands or not. So in this example, we had the benefit of working with a new brand last year in the telehealth services sector. They came to us, as most brands do, when they're trying to launch with two very sort of basic and clear objectives. One is they want to determine the lift of brand media on their business. And thankfully for everyone in this room, I'll talk about it, but spoiler alert, it had an impact, it worked. But more importantly, in this particular test, they were launching in a couple of markets in order to sort of justify a national sort of brand launch and justify the efficacy of spending sort of in these video channels for that launch. And so they wanted to come out of this test with a good understanding of how should I be spending my money across all these different channels, and obviously, some channel-specific learnings as well. With this particular campaign, because of the category, it's basically universally applicable to most consumers. So they were basically targeting adults 18 to 64, as it says here. Basically all household incomes. And what they're really going after, it's really sort of a value and convenience product. So it's you can go use their product to get a quick diagnosis online for a very low fee and get prescriptions if you need it. That's universally applicable to almost anyone, whether you have insurance or not. So as a marketer, great. Like, I can throw lots of stuff at this. There's lots of different options, right? And so we go through the classic planning process that I think a lot of us sort of go through and do our research on the consumer and what channels are they consuming, and what should we include in the mix in order to sort of gain some learnings on this. And this is where we landed at, after some back and forth with the brand and some input from various folks. Essentially a 50-50 break between linear, traditional media, and digital. And on the digital side, because we had the benefit of targeting a younger audience here, we're throwing a lot at it, right? We got a lot of stuff in the mix here. So again, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, CTV, programmatic CTV. There's a lot of things going into this. On the linear side, we're testing broadcast, we're testing cable inventory. We've got a mix of tactics on the digital side, prospecting, some retargeting, some re-engagement. All kinds of fun stuff. And, this was enabled by the brand having already some channel optimized creative. So I think a lot of people have talked about that, the importance and value of, not one size fitting all in terms of creative for these different channels, particularly TikTok. The panel sort of touched on this. We learned in this campaign, as many brands have learned, that UGC creative is pretty important when it comes to executing well on TikTok. So again, spoiler alert, you spend money on brand, it will lift the business. That's what this is here. The chart on your left is, highlights the reach through the campaign. So this was also a relatively short campaign, which was the other challenge. So it was an 11-week campaign. We didn't necessarily have the luxury of being able to sort of do all these little discrete tests in order to get very specific learnings on, the media mix that we would ultimately want to sort of utilize in a national media launch. The one thing to note here, just as we go forward a couple of slides, is note the spend, right? So in that chart on both charts, the bars represent the weekly spend. And so we had a high degree of variability in the weekly spend, which I'll share in a minute, was important. So a little on media mix models. So what I've been going through in my role is a little bit of an education in the last year or so to really better understand, what goes into these things, what are the important considerations that we need to take into account, and, quite frankly, how can we make it, or how can I make it easier or a bit more digestible? I think when we hear the word media mix model, a lot of us, especially those of us that have done it before, immediately go, that's scary. I need to pull together all this data. I got to figure out what to do. I got to get all these people in a room and do all this stuff. What we've tried to boil it down to, or what I've tried to boil it down to, is there's a few key things that we do need to pay attention to when we think about this. One is media weight, in terms of setting expectations on what we're going to learn. If you're only spending 2% of your budget in a specific channel, you're not going to get a read, right? So you need to have meaningful media weight overall and by channel in order to sort of get results out of the model. Variability in spend that I just mentioned earlier. So that's a pretty key one. So, the data scientists would come up here and say, models want lots of different things thrown at it. Again, back to the scales, the business doesn't want a lot of huge variability if you can avoid it. Creating some variance in your spend, if you can, on a week-over-week or daily basis can help significantly in terms of training models. Obviously, you want to account for external factors, right? So what are the pieces that could be impacting the business outside of media spend specifically? And the last one is really maybe the trickiest one, which is, does the data support the level of precision that you're trying to analyze or get out of, the test or the model? And what I mean by that is, do you have enough observations in the data set to be able to say, I want to understand day part performance on network Y? More than likely not. That would require a massive amount of data in order to get that kind of an insight out of a media mix model. So you just have to be, work with your teams, find a healthy balance between how much data do I need in order to answer the question that I'm trying to answer. So in this particular campaign, I like to use really ridiculous stock images. So in this particular case, we use what is referred to as a ridge regression model. And I'm not going to claim to be a data scientist. So please don't ask very specific questions. But we took an ensemble approach. And what that really means is, instead of doing a model, we ran hundreds of models, and we tweaked small variables within those models in order to control for variance, right? And the primary variables that we tweaked in that ensemble approach was ad stock and response curve. So ad stock and response curve are obviously pretty big variables in terms of how you think about the impact of media, and dialing in the diminishing return on those two sort of pieces is pretty critical to getting a good output from a model. The rest of the inputs, is what you would expect, I think, in terms of most media mix models. So obviously we need to make sure that we have the marketing spends, not just the spends that we're managing or executing against, but any other spends that the brand might have internally. We want to account for owned channels, things like PR and, organic social posts and those kinds of contributions to marketing or to brand that may have an impact on the top line business. We, of course, need transactional data. We need first-party data from the brand in order to be able to sort of, build the model to begin with. And then in this particular case, in most cases, you're going to want to account for, economic factors that would impact the business. So in this case, at this particular time, we're talking about, late Q3, early Q4 of last year, stimulus, unemployment, factors in how people would respond to this brand, and then of course healthcare trends in the sense of COVID infection rates specifically, obviously going to potentially have an impact on this particular brand. So we threw all that in the mix, and I failed to say this earlier, but the point of going through all this exercise and doing all this hard work on media mix models is, as marketers, we're not in a good spot to be able to compare numbers on paper, right? So what we didn't want to do, or what we're trying to do our best to avoid as much as we can, is taking that CPA that Facebook gives you and taking that CPA that YouTube gives you and pretending like those are comparable numbers. Because they're not. There's too many differences and variances in the identity sort of within one platform or the other, or the attribution model in one platform and the other. But as marketers, we want quick answers, and we want to be able to make those comparisons, and we want to be able to run with that. But I'm here to make the case that maybe you don't. And this is the reason why. So, it's a little maybe hard to read, but, the chart on the left represents sort of, a stack ranking of performance based on the CPA that's outputted by the individual channels, but outputted by the attribution native to those channels. So, you clearly see that, all the social stuff, save for Facebook and Instagram, does really well in this view. So Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, et cetera, looks really good on paper. The CPAs were low. For anyone that's run campaigns in these places, particularly Snapchat and TikTok, the CPMs are low, so that's contributing probably. The results for the media mix model are in the chart on the right. And so, there are a couple obvious and clear, distinct differences. The primary one is CTV pulls forward. So CTV, in the media mix model, proved to be very valuable. And then Instagram separated itself clearly from Facebook in the overall performance. So, based on the numbers on paper, Instagram and Facebook were a toss-up. But looking at the media mix model, we saw that Instagram had a much more, meaningful impact than Facebook overall. And the rest of it's self-explanatory. Both highlight that maybe we can spend a little bit less on linear TV in the next go-around. So that was a clear takeaway in both cases. So what's the moral of the story here? I think for all of us, our job is a little bit harder, So as I mentioned earlier, as identity is shifting and impacting the accuracy of all these sort of legacy measurement solutions, all these walled gardens continue to pop up. We need to look to other methods to sort of help us better understand how we're going to optimize the sort of media mix across, our investments. And, I think we all know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, it takes education, right? It takes a pretty big heavy lift on all of our parts to sort of talk to the brands that we work with, talk to the stakeholders internally, whatever company we work at, whether we're on the brand side or the agency side, to sort of, shift hearts and minds, so to speak, on not getting stuck to the numbers on paper. Anyway, that's the story.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Well, thank you so